Good evening. Today we rejoiced at welcoming Venerable Children back from Australia. But because she just arrived, she'll not be able to be teaching this evening. So I will be conducting the review. But she will join us again next week for the continued teachings on the book Approaching the Buddhist Path. So let's take a few moments to set our motivation for our time together tonight so that we can make sure that what we're doing is a virtuous activity. So if we pay attention to our mind throughout the day, we are likely to notice an uninterrupted flow of thoughts, feelings, and afflictions. The thoughts move from the future to the past and vice versa. Yet seldom do they stay focused on the present moment. Our feelings change from pleasant to unpleasant to neutral, and we may not even be able to recognize neutral feelings. Yet they do arise. And if we pay even closer attention, we can also notice the afflictions arising. Anger, attachment, jealousy, greed, and so on. Our minds seem to be at the mercy of this seamless, chaotic flow of thoughts, feelings, and afflictions. We are fortunate to have come in contact with the Buddha's teachings, which give us tools to investigate this flow and transform our mind from its current chaotic, confused, and ignorant state into one of lasting peace and freedom. So let's take time now to focus on learning more about one of those tools, loving kindness, and seeing how we can cultivate it in order to benefit all sentient beings, including ourselves. May this time of study and reflection be another step on the path to full awakening. So, first I want to thank and give credit to and pay respect to my sources for this review, beginning with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Venerable Thupten Chodron, particularly in their work on approaching the Buddhist path and one teacher, many traditions. I also consulted Bhante Gunaratana's book on loving kindness in plain English, The Practice of Metta. And I listened to and have relied extensively on Bhikkhu Bodhi's teaching on the Metta Sutta. I also did read some small sections of the Visuddhimagga, which is Buddhaghosa's commentary as translated by Bhikkhu Nanamoli, and also some passages translated by Bhikkhu Bodhi. And then I read the sutta itself in the Sutta Nipata. In terms of what's outlined in the Approaching the Buddhist Path book, the step-by-step approach that His Holiness outlines in the book begins with engaging in meditations in equanimity, which enables us to go beyond the limitations of what we usually consider friends, enemies, and strangers. Because as long as we have that attitude in our mind that differentiates between these three types, we will continue to go in this round of generating attachment to friends, aversion to enemies, and complete apathy of strangers. And so the practice of equanimity teaches us to look at these three recognizing that they are not friend, enemy, and stranger from their own side, but rather become these categories based on our own thinking, our own mind, our own ideas, and based on how they impact us. If they impact us in a way that we appreciate it, they become friends. If they impact us in a negative way, a way that we consider negative, we put them in the enemy category. And if we just simply don't know them, then they remain in the stranger category. So the first step in pursuing loving kindness, as His Holiness outlines, is to recognize that all beings just want to be happy and not suffer, just like we do. Then the next step from His Holiness outline is to cultivate the sense that others are lovable. And we do that by really recognizing their kindness to us. Here it's ideal to not just remain in looking at the kindness of friends and family, but rather to expand our view and look at the kindness of all those who do other jobs in society on which we depend for our well-being. The farmers, the doctors, the teachers, the people who work on the roads, make sure that we can transport and go easily from one place to the other, the grocery store workers, etc. Every single person involved in society contributes to our well-being. So acknowledging that, thinking about that, contemplating that, generates this thought of seeing them as lovable. But I am really not going to focus this review on those two steps. I want to focus the review on the next step, which is the step of actually generating loving kindness. Now, I do want to mention that Venerable Chödrön has written a wonderful book called Guided Meditations on the Lamrim. And on that book, there's some wonderful meditations to develop equanimity and to contemplate the kindness of others. So I'll refer you to that. So I want to focus instead on loving kindness. So I'm wondering if any of you can think about or recount a story when you have witnessed or being the subject of some spontaneous yet very decisive act of kindness from another person, stranger. Any stories that you might remember? Venerable Jampa.
It was in 2011 before I came to the Abbey, and I was going to visit an old friend. It was maybe 3 days before my flight to the US, and maybe even just a day before, I don't know. So, and it was a new part of Berlin where I haven't been, so I drove by bus, double bus, and I was on the upper level, and there it was quite warm. It was end of summer, I think, or September, and so I took off my jacket, and I had a bag where I had my portemonnaie and my money and everything with me. So I took that off, and then I recognized, I have to get out of the bus, so I was in a hurry. And so then I was on the street, and then I wanted to call my friend and kind of figure out where to go. And then I recognized I didn't have my bag with me. And so I turned around. I saw, the bus is still there, but the door's closed. I ran to the bus. And so he didn't want it to open. But then inside I saw a woman. She must have seen me on the upper level. She ran down to the bus driver's, to the driver, and I saw how she held the, the bag. And then I, did that. And so he finally opened the door, and she was a, foreign woman to me, a stranger.
A stranger. Mm-hmm. And she returned your bag.
Yeah, I mean, she stopped the driver, and
That's great. Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that.
By the way, there was my religious visa in it, my pass, everything was in it. So,
very important. Any other stories you want to share?
similar to Venerable Jampa was that just before I came to the Abbey, I was in transit in Tokyo on the flight, and maybe we had a 6-hour transit. So I got out and I went to visit a temple in Narita, and then it started to rain, and then I just stood under the eaves of this building, like hoping it would stop in time for me to go back to the airport. And there was a little Japanese restaurant behind, and suddenly the owner of the restaurant popped out and said, "Here, take this umbrella." I was like, huh? Then said, yeah, please, we have so many umbrellas, just take it. And it was true, they had a lot of umbrellas, but they were so insistent because I felt quite bad. I said, there's no way I can return this to you, I'm going to the airport. So I took the umbrella and then I left it somewhere at the train station, maybe for the next person.
How nice. All right, wonderful, thanks for sharing. I do want to share a beautiful, I thought, a very moving story that I found on Venerable Children's website. Someone wrote this story, and it's about the Vietnam War. And this person was a soldier during that war, and he was recounting that the job of his group his platoon was to search and destroy the enemy. And he said he was very good at what he did. But one particular day, they were walking through the jungle, very heavy, and happened to stumble upon a soldier who immediately surrendered. He said the words in Vietnamese to surrender. So this man was placed in custody, and they were told, because he was considered an enemy and a hostile enemy, they were told not to talk to him, not to engage him in any way, not to relate to him in any way, and he was kept isolated at the camp. So one day, maybe a week later, this soldier, the American soldier, was sitting on a bunker and looking out. And there he saw the Vietnamese soldier sitting on a log all by himself. He watched him just sitting with his hands together in prayer and his eyes closed. After a while, he dropped his hands and hung his head down. And so the soldier continues to say that he remembered this because he felt overwhelming sadness for the Vietnamese soldier. And the longer that he watched him, the sorrier he felt for him, and literally tears came to his eyes. So he decided, against the orders, to go and speak with him. He walked to him, nodded in greeting, and was surprised when the Vietnamese soldier spoke back with him in perfect English. He invited him to sit down next to him and began to talk. The story of the Vietnamese soldier is that he was a college professor in Hanoi, had been educated in England, and he was missing his wife and children who were back in Hanoi. He shared with the American soldier a book of poetry that he had written, in which he had drawn beautiful pictures of dragons and lotus flowers. And he read some of his poetry that was truly wonderful. He got out pictures of his wife and children and shared them with the American soldier. And in return, the American soldier showed also pictures of his family. They spent about half an hour talking, relating to each other not as enemies, but as human beings. And the American soldier said, after a while, we were no longer enemies, but we're friends instead. Brothers, actually. He was a great guy, and we both shared the same reality that neither one of us wanted to be where we were. He needed to be home with his family, teaching at the university, and the American soldier needed to be out of the war. So these two men, in these very horrible circumstances, labeling each other as enemies, found a moment of connection where they reached out beyond the label and really touched deeply each other on the basis of their own humanity. And even though it's not said or spelled out, they really did at some point connect with each other's wish to be happy and not suffer. So these examples that Venerable Jampa, Venerable Damcho, and I'm sure examples that you have encountered in your lives as well as this one show loving kindness in action. Show loving kindness manifesting in the ways that we can relate to each other, in the way that we can help each other, in the way that we can benefit each other. So love is the wish for all sentient beings to have happiness and its causes. And we show that by returning valuables, offering an umbrella, sharing a moment of peace in an otherwise chaotic war. The Visuddhimagga, or path of purification of Buddhaghosa, indicates that love has the aspect of friendliness. Its proximate cause is seeing others as lovable. And when it succeeds, it eliminates malice, just like we saw in the story of the soldiers. And when it fails, it degenerates into selfish affection and desire. Yet the love and compassion that we cultivate in our spiritual practice should not be confused with the ordinary love and compassion we feel for our dear ones, which is usually grounded in self-referential considerations. This person is my friend, my spouse, my child, my parent, and so on. So I'm reading now from page 61 of the book. So while such love may be very strong, it is tainted with attachment because it is partial toward those who please us and biased against those who displease us. And as we have seen in our own life, once we are attached to someone, the stage is really set later to be angry at them when they fail to meet our expectations, fulfill our needs, or do what we want them to do. The love and compassion that we seek to cultivate in Dharma practice is based on having an equal-hearted sense of concern for all beings, which is why equanimity is so necessary. And we simply focus on the fact that they want to be happy just as we do and avoid suffering just as we do. Bhante Gunaratana wrote, "True loving kindness has no ulterior motive. It never changes into hate as circumstances change. It never makes you angry if you don't get favors in return. It motivates you to behave kindly to all beings at all times and to speak gently in their presence and in their absence." So it is an antidote to hypocrisy, because with it you have to show kindness whether the person is present or not. When it's fully mature, loving kindness embraces everything in the universe without exception. It has no limitations, no boundaries. It includes all beings just as they are, wishing them to be happy, not just at this moment, but also limitlessly in the future. This may sound grandiose and maybe even a bit impossible at this time for us, but His Holiness encourages us, saying that we must remember that the seeds of constructive emotions are naturally in our mind stream. And when we cultivate them, they will increase. And here is where the Metta Sutta comes into play, in that it's a beautiful instruction, a beautiful poem to help us bring to mind loving kindness and also show us what it takes to cultivate it. So each one of you has a copy of the sutta. Did you get one? Maybe someone can share with Tracy. Sorry. So what I'll do is I'm going to read all of the verses, and then I'm going to draw from Bhikkhu Buddhist teaching on this sutta, and we're going to go verse by verse to try and distill the wisdom that the sutta contains. This is what should be done. This is verse 1. This is what should be done by one skilled in the good, having made the breakthrough to that peaceful state, he should be able, upright and very upright, amenable to advice and gentle, without arrogance. He or she should be content and easily supported, of few duties and a frugal way of living, of peaceful faculties and judicious, courteous, without greed when among families. He or she should not do anything, however slight, because of which other wise people might criticize him. May all beings be happy and secure. May they be inwardly happy. Whatever living beings there are, whether frail or firm, without omission, those that are long or those that are large, middling, short, fine or gross, whether they are seen or unseen, whether they dwell far or near, whether they have come to be or will come to be, may all beings be inwardly happy. No one should deceive another, nor despise anyone anywhere. Because of anger and thoughts of aversion, no one should wish suffering for another. Just as a mother would protect her child, her only child, with her own life, so one should develop toward all beings a state of mind without boundaries. And toward the whole world, one should develop loving kindness, a state of mind without boundaries, above, below, and across, unconfined, without enmity, without adversaries. Whether standing, walking, sitting, or lying down, as long as one is not drowsy, one should resolve on this mindfulness. They call this a divine dwelling here. Not taking up any views, possessing good behavior, endowed with vision, having removed greed for sensual pleasures, one never again comes back to the bed of a womb. This is a beautiful, beautiful sutta. So what's the origin of this sutta? So let's talk first about the fact that the sutta is really describing the ideal attitude for a follower of the Buddha's teaching. The ideal attitude that a student of the Buddha should maintain towards living beings. It's called Metta in Pali or Maitri in Sanskrit, which means loving kindness. Metta is actually for the first in a set of 4 qualities that characterize this ideal attitude. And these 4 qualities are called the 4 divine abodes, Brahmaviharas, or the 4 immeasurables. Metta is the first one and considered the foundation for the others. It is the basis for karuna, compassion, which is the wish for those who are suffering to be free from their pain and their suffering and its causes. The third quality is mudita, which means altruistic joy, and that is rejoicing in the good fortune and good qualities of others. And the fourth is equanimity or upekkha, an attitude of impartiality towards other living beings. An attitude that shows no favoritism towards some and biases toward others. And so the foundation of all these is loving kindness. This sutta is really a very signature piece and very popular in the Theravada world. And it deals with the development of metta, not in a systematic way as it is written, but rather in a poetic and lyrical way. Because it is a poem. And is written such that it follows certain meter. And it is constructed, even though it's a poem, it is so profound. It is constructed in the classical pattern of the Buddha's teachings, which really unfolds to 3 stages, beginning with sila, or ethical conduct, morality, because sila is the foundation of all of the Buddha's teachings and all of the practices. And then it progresses through concentration or samadhi. And then it shows how to build concentration using loving kindness. And then at the end of the sutta, there is a verse about wisdom when it talks about the fruit of the path references liberation, and which is the fruit of wisdom. So it contains the 3 sila, samadhi, and prajna. In the sila section, the sutra talks about not doing anything that would gain criticism from the wise ones. It talks about observing, or it refers to observing precepts very closely, very carefully, so that one becomes a model of right conduct. So sila is a prerequisite for the practice of metta, because ethical conduct prepares the mind. It softens the mind. It makes the mind a fertile ground where we can expand ourselves to include all sentient beings. It helps the mind be responsive to the feelings of others, and eliminates the qualities such as ill will that make the mind rigid and closed. So it opposes anger, it opposes ill will, it opposes rigidity. And I found the background story quite moving too, and I'm going to summarize it very quickly here. So the Buddha, during the rains retreat, the Buddha was at Sravasti, and he provided, as usual, instructions of meditation to the monks who came, and there were many, and the number 500 is mentioned. And so the monks came, received instructions on what to meditate on during the rain retreat, and some of them dispersed to find different appropriate locations where they could do these retreats. And the group of monks went on their pilgrimage until they found this amazing village at the foot of the Himalayas. Beautiful. And when they got there, they were received so generously by the villagers. Not only were the villagers happy to see the monks, but they provided all the requisites, and they invited the monks to stay for the rain retreats. They provided adequate lodging in this beautiful forest, and the monks spoke among themselves and decided that this was such a perfect place for them to spend the 3 months. They were very happy. So they were invited to stay, and they accepted the invitation. Sure enough, they started on their meditation, and the first couple of days it was wonderful. They were quite happy and pleased. Yet, as the time went on, they began to experience some difficulties. They began to see ghosts and scary apparitions, and they became frightened. There were strange noises and grisly sounds and grisly visions. They couldn't understand what was happening. But what was happening was that there were some deities living in that forest. And when they realized that the monks were not there for a short visit, but that they were staying for 3 months, they didn't like that very much. They wanted the monks to go away, so they were trying to scare them to go away. The scary visions and ghosts and sounds did not stop. And the monks started to look very grim and depressed and have problems concentrating. So they gathered together to talk about what to do, and they decided to go back to the Buddha and ask for some advice. So they went back to where the Buddha was and asked him for advice. The Buddha realized that he could send the monks to some other place, but with his far vision, he could see that this was the only place where these monks could attain arhatship. So they have to find a way to make it there and to stay and to overcome to overcome the problems and the challenges and obstacles that they were encountering. So the Buddha taught them the meditation on loving kindness for 3 purposes. One, so that they could practice this loving kindness and expand their heart. So that this practice would be a protection for them. And so that they could reach jnana. So those were the 3 goals the Buddha had in mind when he taught the sutta. The Buddha asked the monks to learn it by heart and then recite it every morning and evening. As the monks returned to the forest, they approached all together, reciting the Metta Sutta and radiating loving kindness towards the deities. And while they were doing this loving kindness emanating from their heart affected the deities so much that they welcomed them back to the forest and never again gave them any trouble. So that's the power of this sutta. So now we can go over it verse by verse. Again, this is relying on the commentary by Bhikkhu Bodhi, his teaching on this sutta, which I found just magnificent, so beautiful. And so we'll start with verse 1. This is what should be done by one skilled in the good, having made the breakthrough to that peaceful state. He should be able, upright and very upright, amenable to advice and gentle without arrogance. So first the verse states, who is the practitioner intended by the sutta? So who is the person to undertake the instructions given? So it is someone who is skilled in welfare, skilled in the good, one who knows what is truly good, what is truly beneficial, and whose purpose is to practice and realize the state of peace. Here the text refers indirectly to attaining nirvana and refers to making the breakthrough, which is the ultimate goal, making the breakthrough to peace. But that breakthrough comes through developing the qualities of ethics, concentration, and wisdom. And loving kindness covers the qualities of virtue, morality, and through its practice, it is transformed from a moral practice into a meditative state. So we begin with the moral qualities that are the prerequisites for the development of the meditative state that is loving kindness. And so one of the first requisites then is that one should be able or capable. It's kind of a practical skill in leading the spiritual life, knowing what should be done, knowing what should be practiced, knowing what should be abandoned, knowing what to cultivate, knowing the different stages of the path. So even before one starts, one needs to have some idea of the path that we are to travel on, the possible pitfalls, how to deal with those problems. So these are all practical skills that we need to have in advance. Then it goes on to say that one needs to be upright, which means not to be deceptive, not to be dishonest, not to be hypocritical or crooked, but rather really appreciate moral rectitude and practice that. Be straightforward. If you have precepts, hold your precepts well. Of noble speech means to be easy to speak to, easy to correct, easy, open to advice and willing to accept it. Having a gentle and soft character means not being stiff or rigid or obstinate and fixed in one's attitude, but having a gentle and soft character. Able to empathize with others. Then not being proud, not being arrogant, not being haughty, but rather being humble, not regarding oneself as superior to others, but placing oneself at the same level of others. The next verse. He or she should be content and easily supported, of few duties and a frugal way of living, of peaceful faculties and judicious, courteous, without greed when among families. Here it talks about a person being easily content, not having many needs, or demands, but being content with the requisites that are given, not asking for many things here and there. So it really talks about a bit about the ideal in terms of how we live the monastic life with few needs, few demands, which then leads to being easy to support, because with fewer needs and fewer demands, then the families and the donors and the supporters don't have to be burdened so much in order to support the monastics. But it also talks about not being overly involved in too many activities, in too many duties, so that we can have space of mind and one can have energy to engage in the practice, to cultivate loving kindness. So in order to cultivate metta, one needs to lighten up on one's activities. Not just lightening up in one's activities, but also really restraining the senses. Not letting the senses become entangled with or overly involved with sense objects. When the sense faculties are restrained, the mind becomes calm. The calmness of the mind spreads to the senses, so that it seems that the senses are also calm. Then the practitioner is described as discreet, having pragmatic wisdom, knowing how to handle relations with others, how to go about one's activities in daily life, not imposing oneself upon others, not being bold, not being arrogant, not being proud, not being obnoxious in one's behavior or speech, not being greedy or making excessive demands from lay people. So you can see how these two verses already are sort of laying the groundwork in both behavior and mental attitude with which to engage in the practice of metta. Then the next verse, he should not do anything, however slight, because of which otherwise people might criticize him or her. So here, virtue or morality is divided into two. First of all is the virtue of restraint, avoiding engaging in negativities, but then the virtue of actually engaging in positive conduct. And so one should restrain oneself so as to not do anything, even slightly, that would earn the reproach of the wise ones. One needs to be impeccable in one's observance of morality, and at the same time engage in positive conduct. So as one observes these principles, then the mind becomes gradually and subtly transformed so that it becomes more and more conducive to the development of loving kindness. So here there's kind of a shifting of gears in this verse number 3, in that the next two lines actually start talking about this attitude of loving kindness. So we go from the practice of sila, and now we're changing gears towards the practice of concentration, using loving kindness as the basis. So it begins with a general statement of the principle. So what is loving kindness? So loving kindness is the wish for the welfare and the happiness of all sentient beings. And that is what is actually being expressed in these two lines. Wishing that sentient beings enjoy good health, and wishing that they be safe and secure, free from harm and danger, and wishing them to have a happy mind. So in other words, may all beings be happy and secure. So here we're actually wishing for three things. Wishing for physical well-being, wishing for freedom from harm and danger, and wishing for inner happiness and peace of mind. So one first begins with the universal wish for the welfare and happiness of sentient beings. However, as we all know, it is very difficult to begin with a general wish. May all beings be well and happy is so large, sometimes it's really hard to grasp. We have to start with the smaller chunks that are more manageable for our minds. Our minds are not yet that vast. So then one has to practice in more specific ways. So then the text moves into developing kindness for different classes of beings. So it makes a segue from the general to the more specific. And it takes the whole sphere of living beings and then divides them into different types. And what is actually encompassed in the verse, even though there are compressed types, it actually needs to be expanded when we're looking at the actual practice. So filling in the gaps takes place as part of the actual practice. So on verse 4, it reads, whatever living beings there are, whether frail or firm, without omission, those that are long or those that are large, middling, short, fine, or gross. So we begin by dividing beings into two classes. Everything that is stationary and everything that is moving. By stationary things, what was meant was vegetation, and what is moving meant animal life. But according to Buddhism, plants are not sentient. So stationary came to mean those beings that are strong. And those that are moving came to mean those that are weak. So the classes are the weak or frail and the firm or strong. Then one takes beings according to their size. Long, such as nagas and lizards, middling and short, or tall, middle-sized and short. Then according to their volume as being large, elephants, whales are some examples. Middle-sized beings could include humans, horses, dogs, etc. And small beings we can do insects and other little ones. And then those beings that have gross bodies versus those who have subtle bodies, like other realms of existence, such as the celestial beings of subtle bodies we cannot see. So then those are now the expanded categories. And then we move into verse 5. Whether they are seen or unseen, whether they dwell far or near, where they have come to be or will come to be, may all beings be inwardly happy. So here it continues to divide beings into seen and unseen. By seen, we can understand one way would be all things that we have ever seen in our life and things that we have not seen in our life. But it can also mean those beings who are visible to us and those who are not visible to us, or those are outside of the range of our normal vision. Then the next distinction is between those living nearby, such as in our neighborhood, our town, even our country, versus those who are living far away, in another continent, in another country. Then the last distinction here is those that have come to be and those about to come to be, those who are born and those who are not yet born or about to be born. So then you can see that after one goes through all these classes of beings in the meditative development, then you begin to get some skill in expanding loving kindness to each of these categories. And then as we take each one of the categories, we try to radiate loving kindness towards each one of those categories, beings in that category, until one succeeds in developing some sense of mental state. One succeeds in developing that feeling in the mind. And so after you're done with each category and you have developed that feeling for that beings in that category, then you can move to the next category. So, however, the method that is spelled out in the sutta is still too advanced for us. And so it is recommended that we start with a more simple way, a more elementary method for developing loving kindness. In the sutta itself, we do not find that method, but it's taught in the Buddhist tradition. And it begins with oneself. So we begin the development of metta with ourselves, and then gradually we expand that to a dear and respected person, such as a teacher, then a very close person, maybe a parent or a caretaker, then an ordinary friend, then a neutral person, and then at the very last, once your metta is really strong, then we can tackle a hostile person or someone we've labeled an enemy. In Buddhism, one teacher, many traditions, His Holiness mentions that generating love towards ourselves isn't selfish, because the goal is to generate love towards all sentient beings, which includes us. So we too are worthy of love and kindness. So doing these meditations, beginning with ourselves first, help us counteract self-hatred and frees our mind to develop our own potential. So we begin by using ourselves as the standard, as the criterion, because in order to generate the feeling of loving kindness for others, one first has to get a sense of what it means for ourselves, what it feels like to generate this wish for a person. And because it's easier to connect with our own desire for happiness and our own desire to avoid suffering. Because once we connect with it for ourselves, then it's easier to then project that to others and realize, oh, this is the same thing for everyone else, for every other sentient being. So then when we can feel that we're generating these for ourselves, then we can move to the other categories, leaving the hostile person or the enemy for last. So when we are, and the instruction is that not to move to the next category until we have had success in generating loving kindness for the particular category that we're working on. So it's a very gradual method, and it takes a long time, and it's best not to hurry, but to take our time to really make sure we're cultivating strongly. And again, we start with the words. The words help us generate the feeling. Once we have the feeling, we radiate the feeling, so that we imagine that all beings in the category that we're working with are actually receiving this feeling from us. We try to generate these feelings from every pore of our body, in all directions, and we'll go into that for the next verses. So going back to the hostile person, if by the time you get to the hostile person and you're trying to develop metta for them, you realize that you're actually going back into anger and resentment, just stop. Go back to the previous group and continue to rebuild and strengthen your metta. Don't persist with the hostile person if you start generating feelings of anger or aversion, because that's not conducive. There are some other ways to try and overcome the aversion and anger if you start feeling that for the hostile person. And those are mentioned in the teachings, such as thinking about the person's kindness, really focusing on that person's wish to be happy and not suffer, thinking about the good qualities of that person, rejoicing at their good qualities, thinking that this person's parents loved them just as much as your parents loved you. And so we try to get at it with some reasoning to kind of try and loosen up the aversion and the anger and the hostility, loosening up as much as we can, and then starting again with the metta. So we proceed cautiously. So going on to the next verse. Verse 6. No one should deceive another, nor despise anyone anywhere because of anger and thoughts of aversion. No one should wish suffering for another. So, as you can notice in the verse, there's been another shift happening. In that the previous section, the Buddha was explaining loving kindness as the wish for the well-being and happiness of others. And now he's focusing more in the relationship between beings, in the relationship with other beings. Because really an unfortunate part of our relationship with others is that often they are tinged with conflict, affected by violence and discord, just like the story that I read at the beginning about these 2 soldiers in the war. And we don't need to go to war to feel hostility and aversion and to have conflict with others. So at this point, the text then is helping us generate the wish of let our relationship with others also be healed. Let our relationships with others also come from a place of loving kindness, acceptance, and gentleness, rather than ill will, anger, or deception, or cheating. So this is giving now a new tone to the practice of loving kindness, giving it a broader compass, expanding its range of application, not just to each individuals, but also to the relationship between individuals. And wishing that those relationships be marked by honesty, understanding, respect, and support, rather than deception, cheating, violence, and so forth. And here we can see again how the Buddha values harmony, because by engaging in relationships that are framed with honesty and that are framed in support, that are framed in genuineness, then we're bringing harmony with all beings. And again, this is a thread of the Buddha's teachings, and we can see that particularly strong in the monastic community, how it's based on harmony. So this verse also completes the section on meditative development, so the section on concentration. And here is something quite important about the message that's included within the sutta. And that is a principle that underlies all of the Buddha's teaching. And it's that the mind can be changed. The mind can be transformed through the repeated development of the thought process to changing how we think. And through this repeated development, familiarization, meditation, by moving our mind from one thing into a particular positive direction, and then using that thought process to awaken, to mold, to cultivate a state of mind that then corresponds with that new way of thinking. That's how this transformation is occurring. So at the very beginning, one might not feel a strong loving kindness, and that's fine. We have to start somewhere. So don't think that if you don't get results quickly, that means you're not doing it well, or you're not, or the practice is not working. So don't get discouraged. You have to give time for this transformation, for this changing of gears and thinking and thought patterns to happen. So the whole point and this is something that Bhikkhu Bodhi stressed that I found so beautiful, is that we don't begin with a natural aptitude towards loving kindness. We begin with minds that are actually shapeless, defective in some way, because they are used to different thought patterns. And so what we're doing with this meditation technique is to give shape and form to the mind in the direction indicated by the particular topic or subject of the meditation. So we are molding our mind in this new way. So then the next verse 7. Just as a mother would protect her child, her only child, with her own life, so one should develop towards all beings a state of mind without boundaries. So this verse now is moving from the development of loving kindness. So now it's assuming that we have generated this basic now foundation of loving kindness. We've generated this feeling as now is active in our mind. And now this verse is showing us how to intensify it, how to make it stronger, how to really make it so that it does not wane. And the text uses this simile of a way, based on the way that a mother feels towards her only child, that she loves that child so much that she would be willing and ready to sacrifice her own life to protect her only child, to save his or her life. And the Buddha is saying that towards all living beings, one should develop such a measureless state or mind of loving kindness that we should be able to do that, or be willing to do that. And so the thought should come out readily in their mind that we're ready to protect that being, even with our own life. And if we believe strongly in rebirth, then it should be easy to think and to imagine that every sentient being must have been our child in some past life or another. So by looking at a sentient being in front of us and remembering this being was a child, my child in the previous life, then we can bring this attitude towards the forefront. And to know that we have loved this person in front of us, this being in front of us, not just now in this lifetime, but also past lives. Sometimes this method does not work for some people. So you can choose an approach that works for you. Some people use the mother, sometimes that doesn't work, maybe you use a caretaker. But another similar approach that helps you really connect intensely with this feeling of wanting to give up even your own life for the sake of another. So then we move to verse 8. It says, and toward the whole world, one should develop loving kindness, a state of mind without boundaries, above, below, and across, unconfined, without enmity, without adversaries. And so this verse starts to talk about the directional expansion of Metta, the ability to expand Metta to beings in all directions. You know, this brought me back to something that we say every morning when we're getting to do our prostration, and that is we visualize the Buddha with this light rays extending in all directions. So this kind of brings me back to that visualization. It's like, yeah, this is definitely what we're seeing, is the Buddha's qualities expanding, his love, his compassion, expanding to all. So this is what we come to now in this sutta, is this point where we can radiate outwardly. And this is done after we have been successful in intensifying our metta like a mother for her only child. So using then different directions, and then while the text indicates above, below, and across, the application, the actual practice, usually begins with east, south, west, and north. So beings in the north, in all those directions, we focus on sending. We take one direction at a time. Focus on sending metta to all beings in the northerly direction, then in the easternly direction, and so forth, until we've covered all of the directions. And if you want to, you can also cover the intermediate directions. Then from that we move to beings above and below, until we can extend loving kindness to all beings in those directions without any obstruction. We can then go into the different planes of existence, or even the different continents. We can start at the Deva realm and go all the way to the beings in the health realm, etc. Verse 9. And verse 9 is now, assumes that we have now fully realized the practice, and is moving to the next step of actually making it a divine abode. And it reads, whether standing, walking, sitting, or lying down, as long as one is not drowsy, one should resolve on this mindfulness. They call this a divine dwelling here. So this verse describes how one practices loving kindness as a Brahma Vihara, or a divine abode. That is how we maintain it continuously, without a break. So it focuses on loving kindness as mindfulness. And they say that this is the abode of the divinity. The real divine place is the dwelling of loving kindness. Not just doing it from time to time, not just doing it when you're on the cushion, but doing it continuously without interruption, standing, walking, sitting, or lying down. And as one generates that wish continuously, this loving kindness meditation leads to a state of very deep samadhi, a state of meditative absorption. Through this practice, it is said that one can reach up to the third jhana. Those who attain this state can be reborn in high realms of existence, even beyond the human realm. However, even though they may live there for a long, long, long time, they would still have to die and be reborn, unless they generate wisdom, which is then the true cause for liberation, combined with loving kindness. So the last verse talks about wisdom. And it says, not taking up any views, possessing good behavior, endowed with vision, having removed greed for sensual pleasures, one never again comes back to the bed of a womb. And so it summarizes how the qualities of a stream enter through attaining of the path, through the attainment of the path and the fruit, the stage of non-returner, can be accomplished through this practice of metta. So through not falling into wrong views, being virtuous, practicing sila, like was described in the beginning verses, and that with insight or vision, by discarding attachment to the senses, to desire, never again does one come to be in a womb. And this is done because as the meditator exits the jhana, the third jhana, the meditator then looks back and tries to figure out what was this state that I was in. Examines it and sees that even though it was a magic and wonderful experience and it was so blissful and peaceful, that it's generated due to causes and conditions. It's a dependent arising. It's impermanent. And it's in the nature of dukkha. It's unsatisfactory. And because it's unsatisfactory, it's not worth clinging to. It's not I. It's not mine. And so when the meditator generates this wisdom of impermanence, not I, not mine, not self, then that wisdom becomes the liberating force. And so as that investigation continues, the wisdom reaches maturity, and there comes the breakthrough to the unconditioned, to nirvana. So then, having gone through this, through the sutta, I wanted to ask, having heard the Buddha's word, what do you think are the benefits of practicing metta?
One of the benefits is when my mind is criticizing someone, if I just switch to this practice, then my mind switches to loving kindness. Because you can't have both of those competing feelings in the mind. So it's a good antidote to get out of a critical, judgmental mind space.
It helps one to sleep well, because the things that wake us up at night are usually the things we have regrets for. And so if I wake up at night and I find my mind going 100 miles an hour, I will often do this practice, and it smooths things out, and I can sleep again.
Venerable Kuka.
Well, the reason that the Buddha taught it is so that you're fearless. No matter what's happening to you, you won't develop afflictions that will cause you to suffer. You're really stable in your own, you take refuge in your own goodness and your own wisdom.
Yeah, true.
I love the way that it was put together with the 3 higher trainings. So the whole idea about using loving kindness to cultivate ethical conduct for them to really relate to one another. And then I'd always been, I've tried it on a few occasions on how to use love as an object of meditation. But to go through these the way that you unpack them, to get to a point of a flavor in my mind that I could then put my attention on. I found a little bit more in here that could help me with that. And then that last piece of just seeing, who's meditating, who's suffering, who are you wishing well. The whole idea of I and self looks like it would loosen up quite nicely after you go through those first 2 higher trainings. So it really puts the 3 higher trainings in a very refreshing kind of way.
Yeah, and they were unpacked first by Buddhaghosa, then by Bhikkhu Bodhi. I just borrowed from Bhikkhu Bodhi. I didn't unpack it, I just repeated what he said. So full of wisdom. Other thoughts?
It's an antidote to so many negative states of mind that have so many disadvantages, such as anger, somebody mentioned, judgmental, and it brings joy.
Just to reiterate from the beginning, it really leads to a sense of harmony amongst the practitioners, even if it's not all the people doing it, just one person practicing loving kindness in a group can really change the dynamics.
Yeah, very true. Okay, so I will read the Buddha elucidated 11 benefits of this practice. First of all, you sleep well. Venerable Seppel covered that one. You wake up feeling well because you get a good night's sleep. You have no worries. You wake up, you're rested and relaxed. You're not likely to have any nightmares because you don't have any worries. And then no fears, like Venerable Kunga said, no fears. Become fearless because there is no, you have built self-confidence that you can face whatever arises. Then the body relaxes and your face is joyful. I mean, we know this when people are happy, they They smile, they relax. So when you feel love for all beings, it just shows in the face. When you're honest, when you are open and flexible and soft, then these things radiate, and people gravitate toward you and enjoy being around you. The next one is even animals and celestial beings feel drawn to you. And your mind generates, when you're practicing metta, the mind's generating this peaceful feel around. And some animals and even people can sense that. Spirits protect you. There are times when we feel guided and protected by beings that beyond our sight. And these are the words of Bhante Guranatana from his book, Loving Kindness in Plain English. As he was saying that whether it's literally true or there is some other energy that gives us this sense of guidance and protection, the Buddha included this among the benefits of practicing metta, remembering the response of the forest spirits when the monks began reciting the sutta. So this kind of goes back to the original story. Fire, poisons, and weapons will not harm you. And here, fire, in the fire sermon, the Buddha said that poison is of three kinds: greed, hatred, and delusion. And that these weapons, like daggers, can cut your peace of mind into pieces. And that the Buddha described bodily, verbal, and mental weapons. When people quarrel and they argue with each other, they stab each other with verbal daggers. These are what the Buddha was saying. Also in the Dhammapada, the Buddha said, there is no fire like greed, no misfortune like hatred, no suffering like delusion, and no greater happiness than peace. And this was all included in Bhante Gunaratana's book. It's a beautiful elucidation on loving kindness. So then, in the last few minutes, I thought we could actually do some metta. A few minutes of metta meditation. And just as the method describes, we'll start with generating metta for ourselves. So first one, sleep well. You wake up feeling well. You're not likely to have nightmares. Your body relaxes and your face is joyful. No fears. Even animals and celestial beings feel drawn to you. Spirits protect you. Spirits protect you is number 6. Yeah. Number 7 is fire, poisons, and weapons will not harm you. So there are 11 benefits, and I guess I only copied 7. But not to worry, I can go back to the source right now and try to get what the other ones were, so that you can have the complete count. Because I think it's important to also meditate on those benefits, because the more that we, as we know from other practices, the more that we can connect with the benefits of a practice, the more likely that we are to do it. So here we go. Number 8. Your mind immediately becomes calm. Number 9. Your complexion brightens. Number 10. You'll die with a clear mind. And number 11, you'll die in peace. Yeah, and these are the Buddha. These are noted in a sutta. Let's see if I can get it. It's called The Benefits of Loving Kindness Sutta, Metta Nisamsa Sutta. And I read them in Bhante Gunaratana's book. It's a lovely book. I recommend it if anyone wants to read it. So now we can go back to the, you're welcome, to the practice, to the meditation on metta. And as I said, because the actual practice begins with generating metta for ourselves, then we'll start with that one. And we'll do just a few minutes of that, and then we will conclude the review. So then go into your meditative position. And bring your mind firmly to the space, to your chair or cushion. We can do a quick body scan so that we can relax and let go of the tensions that we may be holding in various parts of our body. The usual tension places are the tummy, the shoulders, the neck. So check to see if you have tension in those areas. As you're relaxing, just focus on your breathing. And try to relax even further by just focusing on the breath going in and out. So we begin by generating the metta thoughts. You can just repeat in your mind. May I be well. May I be happy and peaceful. May no harm come to me. May no difficulties come to me. May no problems come to me. May I always meet with success. May I have patience, fortitude, courage, understanding, and determination to meet and overcome obstacles. And as you're repeating these thoughts, try to get a sense for the feeling that is arising. If you're not feeling anything, then we can go back through the thoughts again. May I be well. May I be happy and peaceful. May no harm come to me. May no problems come to me. May I always meet with success. May I also have patience, fortitude, courage, and determination to meet and overcome obstacles. And when you have that feeling, if it starts arising, focus on that feeling. Try to really pay attention what it feels like. And then continue with the same thoughts as before. Followed by focus attention to the feeling that is arising and going back and forth between the two. We'll do this for a couple of minutes in silence. Okay, so I've gone way over time, but it's such a wonderful topic and such a beautiful sutta. So I got quite joyful in doing the research and listening to all these teachings. So I wanted to share them with you. Thank you for listening. So now we'll do the dedications, beginning with page 30 of the Blue Book and then going on page 71. Heart Sutra, right? Later. One question maybe, if I'm not sure if I can answer, but I'll try.
It was very simple.
I'll
Just wondering what the source was of this, the text for the meditation you just led.
The text, it also came from loving kindness in plain English.
Oh,
Yes, by
Bhante.
Bhante ji. Yes, beautiful.
No, I was just curious because I've heard teachers lead this meditation in so many ways. Like, one of my teachers used to put in all the factors of the concentrations into it. So, on the basis of joy, may I develop this? May I develop? It's like, whoa.
No, it goes into that. It really goes into that. May I have loving kindness? May I develop all of these things? May I be gentle? May I be generous? It goes into that, but I didn't have enough time to go through them. But it gets quite long, and
It gets you to nirvana, basically.
It's very beautiful. So anyway,
Ellen Wallace has a great one too.
Oh,
Just letting people know the resources
thank
out
you.
there.
Yes, that's lovely. Okay, thank you.